Hey, I want to welcome Rick Campbell here to the Meacham Writers Workshop.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick.
For a little interview. And in this series, I've actually been asking people to start off by reading a poem, and we can talk a little bit about that and go from there.
All right, thanks. I'm going to read. I'm going to read a new poem instead of one from the book. But in terms of just the little background you would do if you were at a reading, this poem, I'm actually sitting at the breakfast table, and I have one of those old maps of the United States on the wall, and it's the cram one where some states are yellow and some are green and some are red. It's that one that some of us are old enough to have had in our geography classes. Of course, nobody has geography classes anymore, but things I learned from eating breakfast in front of the map of the world, in front of the map on the wall. That Pittsburgh is east of Palm Beach, and Tallahassee, as far west as Detroit, sits above me as I eat. That New Jersey's near the same latitude as the middle of Nebraska, but San Antonio, which has always seemed so far west, isn't. The 100th parallel is easy to see. There's nothing else out there. No text, no cities, few rivers. The line cuts south through what early settlers thought barren and only Dodge City, its westernness iconic, Matt Dillon etched in my baby boomer mind. Though now I know it's more than the western edge of the Midwest, though such quibbling about the city where cattle went to die and Kitty was a madam with a heart of gold, a heart given to Matt, but he never took it, we think, because that's how we thought then, that because my cram map maker decided to layer Hawaii and Alaska over western Mexico, I have to go to Canada to read longitude west of the 100th. That much of the western half of Mexico is drowned by the Pacific Ocean, and I imagine that this does not happen on Mexican maps. What do they steal from us? Maybe their northern Sierra Range starts in Boise. That longitude lines bow more as they move east and west of the 100th parallel, that in these curving meridians illusions, Cape Mendocino's further west than Cape Blanco, where Michael rolled down the great dune while the humpback item, not more than a damned, plugs cast off the shore. That this discovery causes me to remember Doug Salm's Mendocino and how he named his Tex-Mex band the Sir Douglas Quintet because British invasion bands were selling more records. That Cram's topological chauvinism probably reflects our own. The heart of our land is the center of the world, and though the Greenwich Meridian probably looks straight on English maps, we know straight meridians are as false, though less suggestive and ideological, as the flat earth we could have fallen off until Columbus, Magellan, and all the sailors without names didn't.
Well, that's terrific.
Thank you.
Now, and thinking of the genesis of that, did you actually begin it literally at the table?
Yeah, I sat for at least weeks under this map, and I've become this really bizarre creature of habit. I have a bagel and a cup of coffee, and I'm sitting at the table, and the map's above me, and I'm just actually kind of stunned when I draw my visual line from Tallahassee, where I am, and there's Detroit, and I'm like,
yeah.
You know, like I think Tallahassee's in the east, and because of the way this thing goes, I'm still only 180 miles from the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
But Detroit's in the heart of the country, so so I started realizing, like San Diego, if you draw a line from San Diego east, you're above Charleston, South Carolina, right?
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And then you look up at where like Canada comes down between the lakes. I'm like, who in the world allowed the Canadians to get that close to the U.S., right? You know, that they're like below New York, you know, like
Yeah.
so. So I just started having all these revelations, and I love maps. I have maps on all the walls, and I study maps. I mean, I read maps like other people read books. So
Yeah, I am completely with you on that. I love that. Yeah. Do most of your poems begin with like an actual physical setting like that?
I think there's three usual genesises. One is the genesis is a word.
Genocide?
Genocide. I don't know. You know. Anyway, three ways they start. One is I'll be reading poetry, and something in somebody's poem will make me want to write. So it's a kickoff that has to do with that. The second one will actually be I'm sitting there looking at something and I see it and I have an idea, and especially happens on the road, like you see a sign. I was driving to school one day, and in front of I live in the country, so in front of this place that processed meat, the marquee sign said, "Nostalgia Racers for Christ." And I'm like, oh my God. Well, that was a pun, but you know, I have to figure this out. I have to write about this. And so I end up writing about old stock cars and 442 Hemis and what was nostalgic about racing then, you know, that.
Yeah.
So there's that givenness of a sign, of a word. There's the reading of the poem, and then there's just the foundness of stuff, hearing something on the radio. I think it's the being able to take a line out of context.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
stuff
signs
like
are
that.
great for that. There was a sign a couple of years ago around Christmas time. They were having this sort of religious, one of those old medieval type plays.
Right.
And I guess it was about the apocalypse, because the sign said, "Apocalypse parking 2 blocks with an arrow." You think, come on.
Right. Yeah, there was a thing, a local right-wing church thing. They were, part of their summer camp was teaching children how to run from the plague. And I haven't been able to figure that, but that's got to be a poem, like, you know. And there was a little store where I live that on the marquee, there's a milkshake brand called Freal, F''REAL, and so you're supposed to say for real. But for 4 weeks they spelled it wrong. It came out feral. So feral milkshakes, and I'm like, oh, this has got to work, you know. And so yeah, I like to do that. I like to find those things.
Yeah, because it's playing with language.
Yeah,
you know, which is
and
what a poem's about.
for some reason I write a lot in airports, because you're like alone and you can observe all this stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned reading, and sometimes that would set you off. Who have been some big influences?
The first influences for me, they were Philip Levine, Richard Hugo, James Wright, and curiously, like Li Po and Tu Fu, the 7th century Chinese poetry.
Through Rexroth?
Yeah, although it's kind of like I was a working class kid. I had gone to college. I was like almost 25 years old, and I was living in Cambridge, Mass. And all of my friends were college educated, but of course they didn't have jobs either. They were furniture movers and musicians. And I don't know why they did it, but for Christmas they gave me a book by Levine, a book by Hugo, a book by a Chinese monk, Han Shan, and they said, read this. And I'm I thought I wanted to be a songwriter, and they said, you should read this stuff. And then after I read the books, I went to college and thought I could be a poet. So they're like absolutely influential. And then I still like to read the same poets, but you know, I'm just now reading everybody. Frank Gaspar is immensely important to me. There's this poet out west, Julia Levine, Keith Ratzliff. Now, I came to them because of Anhinga Press, but I think that, you know, if they weren't my poets, they're really great poets, and so they're like the contemporaries that I like to read. And this is going to sound like undue flattery, but years ago when I was here, you and Bob Hickok were reading, and at that period I had one book out, and I was kind of a narrower one subject poet. Like I'd start off on a subject and largely remain there. And I knew I knew what Hugo told us about the triggering subject, but I'd only sort of leap once. And I remember listening to you read and Bob read, and I was kind of stunned. I was like one of those stunned. Yeah, you guys were moving horizontally. You know, your poems were just going places that I knew that you were doing it perfectly. I mean, it worked. I didn't know how you did it. And I thought, and I knew that my mind works this way, but I wasn't the poet able to pull it off yet. And I think if you watch your own development, like I wrote a whole lot of poems before I could figure out like how James Wright write metaphor.
Yeah.
Like, so my goal was to do a metaphor like James Wright.
He makes it seem so effortless.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden I wrote this one little poem. It said, it was on a bus and we're going through this little town and there's a woman in the window and my line was, her hips know that Erie is no moonstruck lover, just a town where we, you know, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
and after I did it, I thought, I somehow have done this thing. I don't know what that even means, but it's right. And you and Bob, it wasn't just metaphor. Your subjects were linked horizontally in a way that made perfect sense to me, and also showed me that there's a way to do this, and it's based on faith. Like you keep leaping, and then if you're really good at it, you leap well, and then of course there's revision, where you realize you didn't leap well. And I think my poetry, it gradually changed to this, and I almost mark it, a little bit of it I mark to like that reading, or those two readings. So.
Oh, you're doing that in that poem.
Yeah, and I started doing this, my third book, Dixmont, I started doing it, I would say like a third of the poems in Dixmont are starting to do this. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, so the first two books, The Traveler's Companion and Setting the World in Order, they're both like, they're heavy Pittsburgh. You know, the Ohio River, the steel mills, they dominate. And I move a little bit within those. I move within culture in Pittsburgh and baseball and steel and the river and history, because I'm an American Studies major, I'm a history major. But in Dixmont, I was now 20 years removed from Pittsburgh, and I had like a new freedom. I could move from butterflies to snakes to Job to cancer to, and I found, like I was always told as a student that there are too many things going on in your poem, and I thought they were wrong. Anybody who said that, I thought they were wrong, because I thought they meant you can't do that much in a poem, but probably what they meant was I wasn't doing it well, or not, yeah. And now I say there's nothing you can't do in a poem, but I say you have to leap and leap gracefully, but even more important, you have to land. You know, you got to come down balanced and be ready to go on to the next thing, and so that's what I'm trying to do. And I write all, like this poem is like I write the whole poem at once. I write, if I get the first line, I write till I'm done, and then later I cut away, but I don't add to poems. I mean, I'll add a word like that. The line about Boise, I'm going to change it to reflect what Mexico lost in the Mexican War. Like, they're not going to get Boise back. When I finish this, they're going to get all that stuff we stole from them in Texas, right? It's going to somehow get back to them. But I start off in the beginning of the poem and I write till I'm done. And so, like, I could write a poem and I might write this in 55 seconds and revise it for 10
months or something.
10 months, 2 months, who knows, you know, so.
All right, well, thanks very much for being with us today.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Everybody out there.